Ryan's story might help you see something that takes many people, including him, years to realize. Ryan is the kind of guy who starts his day at 4 in the morning when the whole town is still wrapped in cold fog and doesn't come home until the sun is gone. He does everything on his own, day after day, hoping that the more you do, the more you get. But what he gets in return is a flat income and a heavy feeling that he's stuck running on a wheel that never stops. Ryan always believed in doing everything on his own. Since he was young, he learned not to let anyone worry about him. He rarely asked for help and almost never asked for advice. To him, asking meant weakness, and relying on someone else felt shameful. After years of farming, he was sure that as long as he worked hard, the land would reward him. But season after season, nothing improved. With the same seeds and the same soil, his neighbors harvested twice, sometimes 3 times as much. Ryan looked at their fields, then looked back at his own, and there was always a small sting in his chest. He wasn't jealous, but he didn't understand. He didn't think he worked less than anyone else. He woke up earlier, went to bed later, and put in more hours. So why were the results so different? His work ethic kept him going, but his stubbornness kept him from ever questioning whether his way might be wrong. He did everything out of habit, without checking, without analyzing, without any system. He simply thought, just push a little harder. That year's harvest hit him like a punch. After years of being worked the wrong way, the soil started to harden. Pests showed up more often and the plants grew slowly. Ryan tried to make up for it by working even more. An extra hour of watering, another evening pulling bugs off the leaves, a few more bags of fertilizer. But everything only got worse. When harvest time came, he knew he'd failed for real. The yield dropped too much. The money from selling his crops didn't even cover the expenses. He had enough left to live on for maybe a month. For the first time, real fear crept into his chest. He'd done everything he knew how to do, and it still wasn't enough. That afternoon, Ryan stood alone in the cracked, dry field. The plants slumped over as if they'd been tired for a long time. The wind kicked up dust that stung his eyes and made him blink again and again. But the burning wasn't just from the dust, and it was the helpless feeling of someone who spent an entire year trying and still couldn't change the ending. He looked at his calloused hands, then across the land in front of him. One thought crossed his mind. I gave it everything I had. So what am I missing? That question kept repeating in his head like an echo. He couldn't find an answer. And in that moment of collapse, when Ryan felt like he could fall apart right there in the field, the real story began. Because sometimes you only start to see what you've been missing when you've reached the bottom of your exhaustion. And from that very place, someone would soon step into Ryan's life. Someone who carried the perspective he'd been missing for years. Ryan leaned against the old fence, his eyes staring blankly at the field turning gray in the fading light, and the wind moved through the drooping plants, making the whole place sound dry and brittle. He didn't have the strength to stand up or to think anymore. His mind was just an empty stretch. In that moment, light footsteps sounded on the dirt. Ryan lifted his head and saw Helen Brooks, a longtime farmer everyone in the area knew. She wasn't the type who made small talk. She spoke little, but every word cut straight to the point. Helen looked at Ryan's field for a long moment before turning to him. She didn't comfort him or blame him. She simply asked a gentle question. Ryan, you work a lot, but do you observe? The question made Ryan tense up. He instinctively put up his usual wall and said he'd tried his best, done everything he could. But when he saw her calm, non-judgmental eyes, he slowly fell quiet, and Helen sat down beside him and said softly that 20 years ago she was exactly like him. She worked so much she forgot to think. She kept going without ever checking what the soil actually needed. She told him about that time, not to show off her experience, but to help him see that some failures don't come from a lack of effort, but from looking in the wrong direction. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word felt like it opened a small crack in Ryan's exhaustion. Just enough for a bit of light to get through. Helen pulled a small, worn notebook from her jacket pocket. She opened it and showed Ryan the dense notes inside, then told him this was what saved her farm from collapsing. She said farming isn't just about physical labor, it's about understanding, about writing things down and adjusting little by little. And Helen told him that if he truly wanted change, he could try the method she'd followed for many years. A method so simple it was almost surprising, yet powerful enough to turn a whole life around. She called it 3 notes, 1 change. First, she told Ryan to write down what the soil needs each week. Not guesses, not gut feelings, but real observation. Whether the soil color shifts, how the moisture looks, what the leaves are signaling. Helen said the soil always speaks to the farmer. Most of us just don't listen. She explained that in the past, Ryan watered out of habit, doing it at the same time every day, whether the plants needed it or not. That caused part of the soil to stay waterlogged, part of it to dry out, and the crops couldn't grow evenly. Keeping notes helps you see what the eye usually misses. Next, Helen talked about writing down mistakes so you don't repeat them. She said farmers don't fail because they make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The ones who keep failing are the ones who forget what they did wrong. Fertilizing at the wrong time, watering too late, choosing seeds that don't fit the climate. All of these can be fixed if the farmer is willing to write them down and review them. Ryan lowered his head when he heard that, because he knew he'd repeated plenty of mistakes every year without ever noticing. Then she moved to the 3rd point. Write down what works so you can expand it. A small patch of land that grows better than the rest isn't luck. There's a reason behind it. There's some pattern of water, light, or method that's right, and the only question is finding it. And Helen said these small things are what save entire harvests. But they're usually overlooked because people are too busy doing everything else. Finally, Helen talked about the 1 change step. Each month change just one old habit. Not the whole system, not the whole farm. Just one thing. Change the watering schedule, change how you weed, change a secondary crop, change the way you fertilize. One small change done consistently beats years of stubbornness. When she said this, she looked straight at Ryan and told him, small changes done consistently will always beat long stubbornness. As she stood up to leave, Helen said one last thing, as if she wanted it to stick in his mind. Doing more isn't the same as doing it right, and doing it right starts with looking at yourself. Ryan sat there holding the notebook, and knowing this might be the first time he'd seen a truly different path for his life. Ryan started his first week with a small notebook he'd grabbed from the store near his house. He opened to the first page, looked at the blank paper, and let out a sigh. Writing down every detail each day sounded simple, but for someone who was used to doing everything by instinct, it felt unnecessary. He tried anyway. Every morning before he began working, he wrote a few lines about the soil, the plants, and the weather. Even then, it still felt unnatural. This takes too much time, he thought, but he kept going because Helen's words kept echoing in his mind. By midweek, when he reviewed his notes, he noticed something he'd never seen before. One corner of the field was always wetter than the rest, even though he watered everything evenly. And he dug a few inches into the soil and found that the drainage system was clogged, causing water to pool in one spot. It was the first time he'd found a real cause instead of a guess. By the second week, taking notes started to feel more natural. Ryan wasn't forcing himself anymore. In fact, each morning he opened the notebook as if it were a new routine. One day, he wrote down that the mango leaves looked more yellow than usual. Before, he would have blamed the weather. But this time, when he read back over his notes, he realized he'd added more fertilizer than the plants needed 2 days earlier. Suddenly, everything made sense. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't the soil. He'd simply overdone it. Finding the real cause felt like opening a new door, and for the first time in years, Ryan no longer felt completely powerless over his own fields. And when the first month ended, Ryan decided to follow the one change Helen had told him about. He chose the simplest change: switch his watering schedule. Instead of watering at noon like he used to, he tried watering early in the morning when the ground was still cool and the dew hadn't fully lifted. After just a week, he noticed the soil held moisture better, and the plants wilted less during the hot afternoons. He was surprised that such a small change could bring such a clear result. It made him realize that doing more isn't always better. Sometimes you just need to do it at the right time. 3 months passed, and Ryan had filled nearly half the notebook. The field he once thought was beyond saving was now surprisingly green. The leaves were thicker, the soil was softer, and even a few rows where he tested new seeds were growing well. Neighbors walking by stopped to stare and asked what he'd done differently. Ryan smiled, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel embarrassed to say he'd asked for help and learned from others. He started talking with the farmers around him. He no longer felt the weight of having to do everything alone. Each conversation gave him a new piece of a puzzle he'd never had. And the more he wrote, compared, and changed his old habits, the clearer it became what he'd missed for 10 years. He didn't lack effort, he lacked a system. After many seasons of exhaustion, Ryan finally understood that the soil didn't change because of how hard he worked. It changed because of how he treated it. And sometimes real change comes from stopping long enough to look closely, and not from pushing yourself to work even more. The lesson Ryan took from his journey was simple but deep. You don't fail because you're weak. You fail because you keep repeating a method that doesn't work. Blind effort only creates exhaustion, not results. A system is what takes you where you want to go. Doing more isn't always good, but doing the right things, even a few, can change your whole life. Ryan realized this when he looked at the notebook full of notes he once thought were pointless. Just like the soil, people need gentle adjustments, not pressure to keep running forever. If you're listening to this story and feel like you've been running nonstop without getting anywhere, try stopping for 7 days. Try the 3 notes, 1 change method. Write down what's happening, write down your mistakes, write down what works, and then change 1 small habit. Just 1. If you'd like to, share in the comments the 1 thing you want to change starting today. And if you know someone who's burning out from working harder without getting better, share this story with them. Sometimes a single new perspective is enough to save an entire season of someone's life.